Have you ever stopped to wonder why your job is, well, the way it is? You know, the deadlines, the org charts, the whole idea of even having a manager. It all feels pretty modern, right? But the blueprint for how we work today was actually drawn up more than 100 years ago by just a handful of thinkers. So let's dive in and meet the architects of your office.
First, to really get this, we got to set the scene. Before these pioneers came along, what did a workplace even look like? I mean, picture a factory floor during the Industrial Revolution. How on earth was that managed?
Well, the system, if you can even call it that, was known as rule of thumb. And that's exactly what it sounds like. Every single decision was based on personal judgment, pure guesswork, and a whole lot of trial and error. There was no grand theory. Each foreman had their own way of doing things, and as you can probably imagine, it was super inefficient and pretty chaotic. The goal was to get the work done, sure, but how it got done, that was anybody's guess.
Okay, so into this chaos steps our first hero, Frederick Winslow Taylor. He was an American mechanical engineer, and he looked at that messy factory floor and saw something totally different. He didn't just see workers. He saw a scientific problem that needed a solution. He wanted to throw out all those old rules of thumb and replace them with precision, data, and science.
And this quote from Taylor himself, it really says it all. For him, best and cheapest wasn't about being stingy or cutting corners. No, it was all about eliminating waste. Wasted time, wasted movements, wasted energy. His whole mission was to find the one single most efficient way to do any given job and then make that the standard for everyone.
And that idea really boils down to his core belief in the one best way. Taylor was absolutely convinced that for any task, whether it was loading steel or laying bricks, there was a single, perfect method. And finding it wasn't about tradition or intuition. It was about scientific study. A totally radical idea for the time.
So how did he actually find this one best way? Well, he broke down work into its tiniest pieces. With method study, he'd map out the entire process from start to finish. With motion study, he'd literally stand there with a stopwatch and watch workers, trying to eliminate every single unnecessary movement. Time study was all about setting a fair, standard time for a day's work. And he even used fatigue study to figure out the perfect amount of rest people needed to stay productive. I mean, he analyzed everything. And this wasn't just some theory he cooked up, it actually worked. When Taylor and his associate applied this method to bricklaying, they took the job from 18 separate motions down to just 5. The result? A productivity increase of nearly 4 times. That is huge. And that efficiency, of course, translated directly into money. At Bethlehem Steel, putting these scientific principles into practice saved the company $80,000 in just 1 year. To put that in perspective, in today's money, that is over $2.5 million. Suddenly, this obsessive focus on efficiency had everybody's attention. But while Taylor was down on the factory floor with his stopwatch, another thinker over in Europe was looking at the bigger picture. So let's meet Henri Fayol, a French mining engineer who was creating a blueprint not for the worker, but for the C-suite, for the boss.
Fayol is known as the father of general management. And that's because he was really the first person to say, hey, what does a manager actually do? He identified these core functions: to plan, to organize, command, coordinate, and control. And he argued that these weren't some special innate skills. They formed a discipline that could be taught and learned by anyone. He laid out 14 universal principles of management. And you know what? A lot of them are going to sound super familiar, but they were game changers back then. Take division of work, the idea that specializing makes you more efficient. Or unity of command, which just means every employee should have only one boss to avoid getting mixed signals. And then there's the scalar chain, which is basically just a clear line of authority, the org chart, from the very top to the very bottom. Now that scalar chain principle demanded a pretty strict top-down flow of information. But Fayol was a practical guy. He knew that if employee E needed to talk to employee O over in another department, it was ridiculous for the message to go all the way up the chain to their shared boss A and then all the way back down. Talk about inefficient. So he proposed something he called a gangplank, a direct line for employees at the same level to communicate as long as their managers were cool with it. It was a really clever way to keep things orderly while also allowing for some much-needed speed.
So, there you have it. You've got these two giants, Taylor and Fayol, both shaping the modern workplace, but from totally different angles. Let's actually put them side by side to see how their philosophies really compare.
Taylor's whole approach was bottom-up, right? He started with the individual worker, the specific task, and tried to find that one best way to do it.
Think of it like perfecting a single, flawless recipe. Fayol, on the other hand, was completely top-down. He started with senior management and laid out these universal principles for the entire organization. He wasn't focused on the recipe, he was designing the architecture for the entire building.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Why does any of this matter to you now? Because whether you realize it or not, these century-old ideas are literally baked into the DNA of your job. Their theories aren't just stuck in some old textbook, they're in your daily routine.
I mean, Taylor's obsession with efficiency and stamping out waste, that is the direct ancestor of modern ideas like just-in-time manufacturing, lean, and Kaizen. And Fayol's principles of dividing up work and having a clear chain of command, well, that's the very foundation of the org chart you see in pretty much every company on the planet. Even business process outsourcing is just taking his division of work idea and applying it on a global scale.
So the next time you're at work, maybe in a meeting or just focusing on a really specific task, think about it. Are you seeing the legacy of Taylor's scientific, optimized world, or are you seeing Fayol's structured, administrative world? The truth is, you're living in a world built by both of them. The super efficient processes, that's Taylor. The hierarchy that defines your role and who you report to, that's all Fayol.